Tonight, we travel to a time after the Great Silence, when the thunder of giants had faded and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. 66 million years ago, the world was cloaked in ash and shadow. The mighty dinosaurs were gone, wiped away by fire and darkness. But from that silence, something new began to stir. Tiny creatures once forced to hide beneath the feet of giants now crept into the open world. They were small, warm-blooded, clever survivors. And though the night was long, these fragile beings carried the spark of the future within them. This is the story of how life began again, of courage, adaptation, and quiet triumph. It's the story of how mammals rose from the ashes of extinction to reclaim the earth, setting the stage for the age of humanity itself. So, dear friend, take a deep breath, let your mind drift, and imagine the smell of rain falling on a world reborn. You're about to witness the dawn of new life after darkness. Before we begin our journey through this forgotten age, I invite you to gently press like, subscribe for more tales of time, and share this moment with those who love to dream through history. Now, close your eyes and let the story begin. The air was heavy that morning, thick with the scent of change, though no creature alive could have understood what was coming. Across the plains and forests of a world ruled by titans, the earth trembled with life. The ground shook beneath the feet of towering beasts. Herds of triceratops wandered through steaming jungles, and high above them, the mighty Tyrannosaurus hunted, each step echoing like thunder. But in the heavens, far beyond the blue, a shadow had already begun its descent. A fiery stone, larger than any mountain, tore through the cold of space toward the fragile green planet below. For millions of years, life had thrived here, unchallenged. In a single moment, that balance would end. When the impact came, it was not merely sound or fire, it was the shattering of an age. The rock struck the Yucatan Peninsula with a force that dwarfed every volcano, every storm, every earthquake combined. In the blink of an eye, the world's horizon became a wall of light. Forests ignited, oceans rose in walls of boiling steam, and winds screamed across continents faster than any creature could run. Within hours, darkness followed. A thick veil of ash rose into the sky, blotting out the sun. The days became twilight, and then blackness. The warmth that had fed the forests faded away. Cold began to crawl across the surface of the earth like a living thing, seeping into every forest, every den, every corner of what had once been paradise. The mighty dinosaurs, the lords of creation, were helpless before it. The plants withered, the herbivores starved, the predators, robbed of prey, turned on each other or lay down in the dust to die. The sound of thunder gave way to silence, the kind that stretches across years. But life, as fragile as it was, refused to surrender. In burrows beneath fallen trees, in cracks of cooling lava, and in deep forest soil, tiny hearts still beat. Creatures the size of mice and shrews, unnoticed for ages, now became the last flickers of warmth in a frozen world. Above them, the ash clouds circled the planet again and again. Rain fell, but it was no gentle rain. It carried soot and acid, dark as ink, washing the world clean in pain. Yet, even in that destruction, the seeds of rebirth began to stir. Somewhere in the dark, a mother mammal huddled around her newborns, sharing the faint heat of her body. Her instincts, ancient and unbroken, told her to wait, to endure, to hope for light. Every breath was a fight, every heartbeat a promise that the age of monsters might end, but not the story of life. Weeks turned to months. Months became years. The ash began to settle. The sunlight, dim and weak at first, finally pierced through the gloom. And when that first golden light touched the surface again, what it found was no longer the world it had known. The jungles were gone, the swamps dried, the lords of the Cretaceous had vanished into legend. But beneath the silence, the survivors crept out. The mammals, small, warm-blooded, watchful, began to explore this broken earth. Their paws touched the ashes of the fallen empires. Every step they took was upon the graves of giants. And yet, in those steps lay the beginning of a new age. The world smelled different now. No more heavy musk of reptilian rulers. No more bellowing cries from beasts taller than trees. Instead, a hush filled the air. A sense that nature itself was waiting, watching what would come next. The mammals fed on insects, on roots, on whatever small traces of life could be found. They grew braver with each passing sunrise. Their eyes, once accustomed to darkness, began to seek the faint shimmer of dawn. Their minds, shaped by survival, began to remember patterns: where to hide, where to feed, when to run. In the charred forests of what was once North America, small mammalian feet left the first tracks in cooling volcanic dust. In South America, rodents crept through skeletal remains of ferns. In Asia and Africa, tiny marsupials clung to branches of half-burnt trees, whispering the promise of a world reborn. And yet, the earth was far from healed. For thousands of years, storms raged, climates shifted wildly, and the balance of life trembled on the edge. Some nights, the sky glowed with strange red lights, the planet still wounded, still reshaping itself. Mountains rose where plains once lay, oceans swallowed ancient valleys. But still, the survivors endured. There was beauty in their persistence, a kind of quiet courage written in the rhythm of their tiny hearts. These were not creatures of dominance or destruction. They were creatures of patience. They waited, they learned, they adapted. And from that patience came evolution itself. Somewhere in the heart of that bleak new earth, perhaps a single pair of bright eyes looked out from a hollow log, sensing a world that would one day belong to its descendants. Those eyes, small and uncertain, could never imagine the kingdoms to come. The forests, the ice, the towering mammals that would inherit the land. But in that moment, the spark of hope burned brighter than it had since the day the sky fell. The giants were gone, but their end was not the end of life. It was the beginning of everything else. And if one listened closely, beneath the silence, beneath the wind whispering across empty plains, one could almost hear it. The faint, steady rhythm of a world learning to breathe again. The age of mammals had not yet begun, but it was coming, slowly, silently, inevitably. As the darkness lifted and the dawn returned, the world awoke to silence. The thunder of titans was gone. The endless roars that once shook the air now faded into memory. In their place came stillness, an eerie, endless calm that stretched across the continents like a shroud. The sun, weak and pale, hung in a hazy sky. It struggled to pierce the lingering clouds of ash that drifted slowly above a wounded earth. The land was scarred. Where forests once rose like green cathedrals, there now lay fields of ash, cracked and lifeless. Rivers ran sluggish and dark, carrying the last remnants of a vanished age out to sea. In the emptiness, small shapes began to move. They crept carefully, as if the world itself might shatter beneath their feet. Their bodies were covered in soft fur, a strange armor against the cold. These were the survivors, the mammals, the children of the shadows. At first, they were only scavengers. They picked through the ruins of the old world, feeding on insects, on roots, on whatever fragile life remained. Each night they hid beneath fallen trees or in caves still warm from the fires of the past. The darkness that had once been their refuge was now their constant companion. Yet even in this bleakness, there was a spark of something ancient and unstoppable. Instinct. The instinct to adapt, to change, to endure. In that instinct lay the seed of everything that would follow. The world without giants was not empty for long. Slowly, the earth began to heal. Rain fell, clean, gentle rain this time, washing the soot from the sky, feeding the soil with new minerals born of destruction. Tiny green shoots appeared where nothing had grown for years. Moss spread over blackened stones, and ferns began to unfurl their delicate fronds toward the dim light. The survivors watched, waited, and learned. They were not the rulers of this new world, not yet, but they were its caretakers. Where once the great reptiles had dominated through strength, the mammals would survive through cleverness, through patience. In the ruins of the ancient jungles, small rodent-like creatures built nests in hollow logs. Their movements were cautious, their senses sharp. Every rustle of the wind, every distant sound, carried meaning. Danger still lurked, though it was no longer the roar of a tyrannosaur or the shadow of a flying reptile. Now it was hunger, cold, and the endless struggle for food. The Earth's climate shifted wildly. Some lands grew hot and wet again, while others froze under blankets of ice. Storms raged for weeks, then gave way to decades of drought. It was a world still in chaos, reshaping itself, learning to balance again. And through all of it, the mammals endured. They grew thicker fur. They learned to store food. Some began to hunt, small and fierce, with teeth made for tearing rather than gnawing. Others took to the trees, learning to climb, to leap, to cling to life above the dangers below. In time, the first ecosystems of the new world began to form. Forests returned, though smaller and denser than before. Grasses spread across open plains. Rivers carved new paths through the land, glittering beneath the faint sun. The air, once filled with ash, now carried the scent of rain and green once more. And into that air rose the cries of life again, chirps, squeaks, growls, the small, uncertain sounds of a planet rediscovering its voice. But not all that survived was gentle. In the shadows of the recovering forests, new predators began to stir. Descendants of ancient reptiles, smaller but still cunning, slithered and stalked once more. Nature wastes nothing. Where one empire falls, another always rises. For the mammals, this was both a threat and a test. They had survived fire and ice, but now they would need to survive each other. The first mammalian hunters emerged, sleek, silent, and intelligent. They hunted not through brute strength, but through strategy. They learned to stalk, to wait, to strike with precision. And with each success, evolution rewarded them. One night, beneath a crescent moon, barely visible through the haze, a small predator paused by a quiet stream. Its reflection shimmered in the water. Sharp eyes, sleek fur, claws curved for gripping prey. It drank slowly, then looked up, alert to every sound. The world around it was vast and uncertain, but something in its gaze spoke of confidence, of a quiet claim to the land. For the first time since the fall of the giants, Earth belonged not to monsters, but to survivors. Still, danger was never far. The planet's surface trembled often, as if remembering the great wound it had suffered. Volcanoes spat fire into the sky, reshaping mountains. Seas rose and swallowed islands. Species that failed to adapt vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Life was a fragile thread, stretching between chaos and creation. And yet, against all odds, that thread held. The mammals began to spread. Across continents still joined by ancient land bridges, they wandered in search of food and safety. Some settled in the north, learning to endure the cold. Others thrived in the warmth of the tropics, feeding on fruits and insects. The diversity that would one day define them had already begun. Still, the ghosts of the past lingered. Fossilized bones of dinosaurs lay buried beneath the soil, silent reminders of the world that had been. Sometimes, the mammals would pass these massive skeletons, unaware of what they were, unaware that their ancestors had once hidden in the shadows of those same bones. But the earth remembered. Every gust of wind over the barren plains, every ripple across the rivers seemed to whisper of the time before, a story written in stone and silence. The mammals, though, had no time for memory. Their world was changing too quickly. They lived from moment to moment, driven by hunger, by instinct, by the endless rhythm of survival. But within that rhythm, something new was growing. Curiosity. They began to explore, to test, to adapt beyond mere necessity. A creature that learned to leap from branch to branch found new safety. Another that dug deeper burrows survived the storms that wiped out others. These small differences, unnoticed by the world around them, would one day shape the future of all life. Somewhere in a humid forest, long after the sky had cleared, a new dawn painted the land in golden light. The air was still cool, the soil soft underfoot. Tiny mammals stirred in their nests, blinking into the warmth. The sun rose higher, spilling across valleys and rivers that glittered like silver threads. For the first time in millions of years, the world felt alive again. The dinosaurs were gone, but their absence had created space. Space for new forms, new sounds, new possibilities. The age of giants had ended, but another age had begun to whisper its name upon the wind. It was a world without giants, yet filled with endless potential. And as the earth turned beneath the light of a forgiving sun, the mammals, small, determined, and full of quiet strength, took their first true steps into the age that would one day be called their own. The nights were long, longer than any that had come before. Even though the clouds had thinned and the sun had returned, darkness still ruled the hearts of those who lived beneath the soil. In burrows hidden under fallen trees, in tunnels carved through soft earth, life clung to warmth. Small creatures, no larger than a man's hand, curled together in nests of dry grass. Their tiny hearts beat in rhythm with the earth itself, steady and defiant. They were the mammals, the silent heirs to a world reborn. For countless generations they had survived by staying unseen. The age of the giants had taught them caution, patience, the art of stillness. They had learned to listen to the sound of danger, to sense the tremor of approaching death long before it came. And now, in this quieter world, those instincts became their greatest gift. Above them, the forests were slowly returning. Ferns grew thick, moss coated the stones, and vines stretched toward the pale sun. The air still carried the memory of ash, but with each rainfall, the scent of green grew stronger. The survivors emerged cautiously into this half-lit paradise. Their fur kept them warm in the chill mornings. Their quick eyes darted through the shadows, alert for movement. They fed on seeds, berries, insects, anything the earth would offer. Each small meal was a triumph, a step further from extinction. And yet, survival alone was not enough. Life, in its quiet wisdom, demanded more. The mammals began to change. Tiny differences, in shape, in behavior, in the rhythm of their lives, began to appear. Some became faster, their limbs stretching for longer strides. Others developed sharper teeth, stronger jaws, keener noses. The smallest changes could decide everything. Who would live to see another dawn, and who would vanish into the soil? Somewhere in the dense undergrowth, a mother creature watched over her young. They were blind, fragile, their fur barely formed, yet they pressed close to her warmth. She nursed them with care that no reptile had ever known, not cold indifference but tenderness. Each heartbeat she gave to them was an echo of something new in the story of life. Devotion. It was this warmth, this bond, that would shape the ages to come. The mammals carried not just life, but love. And from that love, resilience. The nights were still dangerous. Predators prowled, smaller now, but fierce. Descendants of reptiles still hunted in the dark, their scales gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The mammals learned to move silently, to freeze when the air changed, to vanish into roots and shadows. Sometimes the rain would fall for days, flooding their tunnels. They would climb, huddle, and wait, listening to the steady drumming on the leaves above. To them, each sound, each drop, was a reminder of how fragile existence could be. But it was also music, a rhythm that spoke of persistence, of time moving forward. When the storms passed, the air would fill with life again. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked, and from within the hidden burrows came soft rustles, the whispers of a world rebuilding itself. One by one, species began to branch out, each following a slightly different path. Some took to the trees, learning to leap from branch to branch with quiet confidence. Others became swimmers, gliding through rivers in search of safety and food. A few remained underground, their eyes dimming, their bodies built for darkness. It was as if nature herself was experimenting, sculpting new designs from old patterns. In the heart of what would one day be Asia, a creature no larger than a squirrel clung to a vine, staring out across a misty valley. The world before it was vast and empty, but full of promise. It didn't know that millions of years later, its descendants would swing from taller trees, think deeper thoughts, and look upon the stars with wonder. For now, it simply listened to the wind, the leaves, the pulse of the earth beneath. But even in this fragile peace, danger was never far. Volcanoes still rumbled in the distance. The planet's wounds were deep, and sometimes the earth would tremble as if sighing from old pain. Fires would sweep through the forests again, brief but fierce, cleansing and renewing. And always, the survivors endured. Over time, their bodies grew stronger, their senses sharper. They began to cooperate, parents defending their young, small groups, nesting together for safety. Each act of unity, each shared moment of warmth, strengthened the thread of life that stretched through the ages. Night after night, the world slowly changed. The stars, once hidden by ash, now shone brightly again. The moon cast silver light upon rivers that sparkled like liquid mirrors. Insects glowed faintly in the dark, and the mammals watched them, learning, mimicking, adapting. Curiosity became a quiet fire in their minds. They began to explore further from their dens, marking the land, testing its boundaries. New sounds filled the forests. Not the roars of tyrants, but the calls of explorers. Small, high-pitched, and fragile, yet somehow triumphant. In these calls lay the future of the Earth. As centuries passed, the world's temperature rose again. Jungles thickened, lakes filled with life. With every sunrise, color returned, green, gold, and deep blue. The air shimmered with warmth, and in that warmth, the mammals flourished. Some grew larger, daring to hunt openly in the light. Others became faster, darting between trees like living shadows. Each adaptation was a whisper of destiny, the slow preparation for an age yet to come. Still, the night belonged to them. The darkness was their cradle, their teacher, their oldest friend. When the sun set and the chill returned, they emerged, guided by smell and sound, living lives unseen by most of the world. Somewhere beneath the stars, a family of small mammals huddled together at the mouth of their burrow. The mother lifted her head, nose twitching, eyes bright. The forest was alive with movement, the hum of insects, the flutter of wings, the distant howl of something unknown. She listened, steady and calm, her young pressed close to her chest. In her heartbeat echoed the future, steady, persistent, unstoppable. The darkness that had once been a curse was now a home. The survivors had turned fear into familiarity, struggle into strength. They had not conquered the world, not yet, but they had learned how to live within it, how to wait for their moment. And deep within the soil, beneath the roots of towering ferns, the earth itself seemed to hum in quiet agreement. It was as if the planet knew that something had changed, that its story had taken a new direction. The age of reptiles was gone forever. The age of mammals, though still small and hidden, had begun to breathe. In every heartbeat, in every cautious step taken beneath the stars, life whispered one message to the universe. We have survived, and we will rise. From the ashes of destruction, life continued to stretch its arms toward the light. The world was no longer ruled by reptilian kings, but by creatures that breathed warmth into the air, whose hearts beat fast with the rhythm of change. The age of mammals had truly begun, and with it came both peace and power, evolution and endurance, survival, and supremacy. In this new world, balance was fragile. The forests were thick, rivers wound across vast plains, and grasslands began to replace the old fern jungles. Among the rustling leaves and trembling shadows, mammals grew not only in size, but in confidence. Some learned to run across open fields with grace and speed, while others crept beneath the roots of trees, adapting to darkness. The earth was a cradle of invention, shaping life through patience and storms. Millions of years passed in silence and song. Massive creatures began to appear, mammals unlike any before. On the wide plains of what would one day become North America, the mighty mammoths roamed, their tusks like ivory crescents carving the air. They were the inheritors of endurance, wrapped in fur that shimmered with frost. Not far from them, mastodons fed among the conifers, quieter but no less magnificent. The chill of ice and the warmth of life shared the same breath upon the wind. And there were others, fearsome predators that watched from the shadows. The saber-toothed cats, with their long curved fangs and silent grace, hunted across valleys echoing with thunder. Every step they took reminded the world that power had not disappeared. It had simply changed its shape. These creatures were living echoes of an older hunger, molded by new rules. Yet, even among the giants, a quieter revolution was taking place. Small primates, barely noticed, began to watch and learn. They lived among the trees, their fingers curling around branches, their eyes searching not just for food, but for understanding. They could see patterns in the rustling leaves, remember the locations of fruiting trees, and communicate in soft calls. It was intelligence, born in the forest shadows. The seeds of humanity were there, hidden in time's endless forest. The climate was shifting again. Ice sheets crept down from the poles, and then melted back, in rhythm with the heartbeat of the planet. Life adapted once more, as it always did. Mammoths grew thicker coats, while others migrated southward, following the sun. Evolution was not a straight path. It was a dance of necessity and chance, and every movement changed the world forever. In South America, strange beasts thrived. Glyptodons, armored like moving fortresses, rolled slowly across the plains. Megatheriums, the giant ground sloths, stood tall as trees to feed on leaves that whispered to the wind. These gentle titans lived side by side, with smaller mammals who darted between their legs, stealing what scraps they could find. Every life, no matter how small, had its place in this vast design. But in this golden age, danger still waited. Beneath the calm skies, volcanoes rumbled and continents drifted. The earth was never still. It breathed, it burned, it changed. Mountains rose, oceans deepened, and with each tremor, species vanished, while others took their place. Extinction was not an end, but a door, and every death opened the path for new beginnings. Through all of this, intelligence continued its quiet ascent. The early primates began to use their hands not only to grasp, but to explore. They formed bonds, cared for one another, and remembered. In those gentle acts of memory and connection, the universe took its first steps toward consciousness. The story of thought had begun, though it was still buried beneath the ages of stone and shadow. The nights were long in this ancient world. The stars shone upon mammoths and mastodons alike, upon hunters and the hunted, upon creatures who would never meet but shared the same fragile breath of life. And in the darkness, a spark flickered, something no other age had seen before. A creature looked at the moon and felt curiosity, perhaps even wonder. That spark would never die. It would travel through millions of years, through extinction and fire, through ice and time, until one day it would burn behind human eyes. But for now, the earth was still the kingdom of beasts. The roar of saber-toothed cats still echoed through the valleys, and the ground still trembled beneath the steps of the woolly giants. The age of mammals was not just about survival, it was about becoming something new. And as the winds of the next ice age began to whisper through the trees, life once again prepared to change. The mammals stood ready, not as rulers of a brief era, but as the architects of the world that was yet to come. For in every heartbeat, in every breath of this living earth, Evolution continued its song, soft and unending, carrying life forward into the dawn of intelligence. The world had slowly begun to breathe again. After the reign of colossal reptiles and the darkness that had once seemed eternal, life was stretching, trembling, awakening. Small mammals, once hidden beneath roots and rocks, now crept further into the open, testing the sun's warmth on their fur, the coolness of rivers on their paws, and the vastness of the forests above. Each step was cautious, yet brave. Each moment of survival, a quiet triumph. The earth was a new canvas, and these tiny survivors were beginning to paint their own story. Night was still long, and danger still prowled, but instinct had evolved into something more subtle. Awareness, patience, and intelligence. Creatures that had once cowered at the shadows of giants were now experimenting with movement, with curiosity, with interaction. They sought the safe paths through dense ferns, explored the nooks of hollowed trees, and listened to the wind for any whisper of threat or opportunity. In these quiet explorations, the mammals began to adapt. Some developed longer legs for swift movement through open fields. Others grew stronger jaws and sharper teeth to crack the nuts and seeds the forest generously offered. Eyes became keener, ears sharper, and noses more sensitive, capable of detecting the faintest trace of predator or prey. Every small change, every minor adaptation was a step further from the darkness, a step toward dominance in this fragile, reborn world. Among the pioneers of this new age were the earliest primates, small and agile, their fingers adept at grasping branches and leaves. In the high canopies, they learned the patterns of light and shadow, the rhythm of insects, and the location of ripe fruits. Each discovery carried lessons that would be passed down through generations, shaping behavior, refining instincts, and sowing the first seeds of intellect. Below them, burrowing mammals thrived in the safety of the soil. Their tunnels became intricate networks, providing refuge from predators, storage for food, and shelter for their young. Families grew closer, instincts intertwined with care. The act of nurturing, of teaching, of guiding young ones through the perils of the forest began to shape not only survival, but social behavior, a foundation that would echo across millions of years. Time, as always, was both enemy and ally. Generations passed quickly, and life experimented with itself. Some species expanded into open plains, learning to run faster, to sense danger from afar. Others remained in the dense undergrowth, perfecting the art of camouflage and patience. The Earth was a laboratory, and evolution, its quiet, patient scientist. Every success, every failure, shaped the next chapter in life's story. In the shadow of these changes, predators also evolved. Small carnivores learned to stalk with stealth and precision. The balance between hunter and hunted created a delicate web of life, where every movement, every choice held consequence. Survival was no longer a simple matter of strength. It was a dance of cunning, timing, and awareness. And the mammals were learning to lead. Meanwhile, climate shifts continued to shape the land. Rain fell in cycles, rivers swelled, and forests grew thick once more. Volcanoes occasionally erupted, and ash carried far and wide, but life proved resilient. Where one species faltered, another thrived. Ecosystems rebuilt themselves in ever-changing mosaics, and the mammals adapted, diversified, and multiplied. In quiet corners of these forests, social behaviors flourished. Groups of mammals began cooperating in ways unseen before. Families, clans, and small communities formed. They shared warmth, defended one another, and nurtured their young. The first hints of community, the first stirrings of civilization, were buried deep in these acts of care. Trust, once unnecessary in the solitude of survival, became essential. Among the trees, the early primates practiced more than survival. They began experimenting with objects, rolling stones, breaking branches, lifting fruits from unreachable places. The spark of tool use flickered, not yet fully understood, but present. These small acts of curiosity and creativity hinted at the future. A future where thought and action would intertwine in ways the Earth had never seen. Food became a teacher. Seeds were cracked open, roots dug, insects caught and studied. Each attempt at mastery over sustenance refined their senses, their instincts, their understanding. Adaptation was no longer a slow accident. It was an active process, guided by awareness and experimentation. Life itself was learning to think. As centuries passed, the mammals spread across continents. They discovered mountains, valleys, rivers, and plains. Some remained small, hiding in shadows, while others grew larger, bolder, and more dominant. Survival had always been the goal, but now mastery and exploration became equally vital. The Earth was no longer merely endured, it was observed, tested, and gradually shaped by the creatures that had survived its darkest days. The nights, though still filled with predators and storms, became laboratories of endurance and learning. The mammals experimented with movement, with collaboration, with communication through sound, gesture, and smell. Social hierarchies began to emerge, based on cooperation rather than brute force alone. Survival now depended on intelligence as much as instinct, and every day carried the quiet lesson of experience. By the time dawn spread its golden light over these ancient forests, the mammals had carved their niches in every corner of the Earth. They had transformed darkness into opportunity, fear into awareness, instinct into thought. In the hearts of the smallest creatures beat the pulse of resilience, curiosity, and courage. A pulse that would one day culminate in the first true innovators of the planet. From the burrows of timid survivors to the heights of the trees, the stage was set. The world, scarred but reborn, was ready for the rise of beings who would not only survive, but shape their destiny. The age of mammals had truly begun. Shadows were receding. The sun was climbing higher, and life, vibrant, intelligent, adaptive, stepped boldly into a future that stretched across continents and millennia. And somewhere, in the quiet of a river bend, or beneath the canopy of a towering tree, a tiny mammal paused, felt the warmth of the sunlight, and breathed a life that had once seemed impossible. Survival had become mastery. Darkness had given way to dawn, and the Earth, patient and enduring, whispered its approval. The world had grown quieter, yet far more aware. The echoes of thunderous footsteps from mammoths and mastodons began to fade into memory, replaced by softer movements, more deliberate and searching. The age of colossal beasts was waning, and in its shadow something unseen was stirring. Not strength of muscle, but strength of mind. The Earth no longer belonged solely to giants. It was now shaped by the small, the clever, the adaptable. Across the vast plains of Africa, the sun poured molten gold upon the grasslands, and creatures unlike any before began to stand a little taller, to see a little farther. These were the early hominins, distant ancestors of humanity. They did not yet speak, but their eyes carried the first glimmers of thought. Their hands, once used for climbing, now reached for the unknown. Around them, the world was changing again. Ice returned in cycles, creeping down from the poles like a silent tide. The air grew cooler, the forests thinned, and wide savannas opened across continents. Food was harder to find, shelter less certain. In this unforgiving land, only those who could think differently would survive. The first sparks of innovation appeared. Simple stones, once ignored, became tools. A sharp edge here, a flake there, and suddenly, survival took a leap forward. These early beings began to understand that the world could be shaped, that nature was not only to be endured, but to be used. The first cut of flint was not just a tool, it was a whisper of destiny. Their lives were difficult. Predators lurked in every shadow. Saber-toothed cats still prowled the lowlands, and giant birds, the terror birds, stalked the open plains with deadly precision. Yet the hominins had something no predator could match: imagination. They began to work together, to plan, to to share knowledge through gestures and cries. They hunted in groups, defended their young, and learned the patterns of the seasons. Each discovery was a miracle born of necessity, the cracking of bones to reach the marrow inside, the striking of stones to make sharper edges, the understanding of fire. These were not accidents, they were steps toward mastery, guided by curiosity and instinct, slowly transforming into reason. Fire changed everything. It gave warmth against the biting cold, light against the endless night, and protection against the beasts that once ruled the darkness. But it did more than that. It drew them together. Around the first campfires, the ancestors of humanity gathered, their faces flickering in the orange glow. They began to share, not only food, but emotion. They grieved when one of their own fell. They cared for the injured. And in that caring, something profound took root, the earliest form of empathy. The wind that once howled through prehistoric forests now carried the laughter of survival, the murmur of beginnings. The first traces of social order were being written in gestures, in glances, in the warmth of shared flame. The world was still harsh, but the creatures who would one day call themselves human were learning not only to live, but to belong. As time moved forward, generations came and went, carrying fragments of knowledge like embers through the ages. The early hominins evolved into new forms, stronger, smarter, more aware. Australopithecus gave way to Homo habilis, the handyman, whose tools grew more refined. Then came Homo erectus, walking upright across continents, brave enough to face the unknown lands beyond the horizon. They spread across Africa, Asia, and Europe, following rivers, chasing herds, learning to adapt to snow and sand alike. Each migration told a story of fear, of discovery, of the unbroken thread that connected life through time. The earth, too, was restless. Ice ages came and went, reshaping mountains and carving valleys. Forests turned to deserts, and seas withdrew from their shores, leaving behind the bones of long-forgotten beasts. Yet through every upheaval, the mammals endured. The small and the clever survived while the massive and the mighty disappeared. This was the age of resilience, an age that whispered to the future. Beneath the stars, small bands of humans watched the heavens in wonder. They did not know it yet, but they were looking upon their own story, written in constellations. The flickering stars mirrored the flames that danced before them, and both spoke of something eternal, the search for meaning. The nights were filled with danger, but also with discovery. The early humans began to understand patterns, the movement of herds, the rhythm of the moon, the cycles of rain. These were the first steps toward knowledge. The earth was their teacher, and survival was their lesson. They began to create simple shelters, not from instinct, but from foresight. They learned to use animal hides for warmth, to fashion spears for hunting, and to carve symbols on stone, marks that might have been the first language of dreams. Every action, every spark of thought, was evolution's quiet applause. By now, humanity's shadows stretched across continents. The roar of ancient predators grew faint, replaced by the rhythmic heartbeat of survival. Yet deep in their souls, there was something more. A longing to understand. The same longing that would one day build cities, write music, and gaze at the stars. And so, the mammals who had risen from darkness became the dreamers of dawn. The world that had once been ruled by tooth and claw now trembled before the light of thought. From the ashes of extinction, from the silent breath of the prehistoric night, intelligence had finally found its voice. The journey was far from over, but the shape of destiny had already been drawn in the dust of ancient plains, beneath the endless sky of a world still finding its way toward tomorrow. For the first time, the earth had thinkers, not just survivors, not just beasts, but beings who looked upon the world and wondered what it meant to exist. And from that moment onward, nothing on earth would ever be the same again. The nights remained long, yet now they carried a warmth no shadow could extinguish. The flickering of flames, newly tamed by the hands of early humans, painted the faces of survivors with a soft orange glow. These flickering lights were more than comfort. They were symbols of power, of knowledge wrested from the unpredictable teeth of nature. Fire changed everything. It illuminated the darkness where predators had once hunted unchallenged. It warded off beasts and brought life together in small circles of protection and understanding. Around these flames, the first stories were born, gestures and cries that carried meaning, a precursor to language. Hands traced shapes on stone walls, drawing animals and movements. These markings were not merely decoration. They were a record, a plan, a lesson passed from one mind to another, from one generation to the next. The small mammals of old had survived in silence, relying on instinct alone. But these creatures, the early humans, were different. Instinct remained, yes, but it was now joined by thought, deliberate, cautious, yet daring. Hunting became a dance of patience and precision. Strategies were formed in whispered tones, signals of movement and timing practiced with care. One misstep could mean death, yet with each success, confidence grew, and so did innovation. Groups of humans learned to coordinate. They tracked herds across vast plains, reading the wind, the grass, and the faint smell of fear carried by the prey. Spears were sharpened, traps set, ambushes planned. Each hunt was not only survival, but a lesson, in timing, in observation, in the subtle art of working as one. Meanwhile, their homes grew more sophisticated. Tents of hides, simple yet clever constructions, appeared near rivers, caves, or overhangs. Each shelter was placed with care, taking advantage of natural protection, sunlight, and proximity to food. The world had been harsh, but these early humans learned to shape it, not merely endure it. Fire also brought light to curiosity. Around its glow, early humans discovered the patterns of night and day, the cycles of the moon, and the way seasons altered the movements of prey and the growth of plants. They began to store knowledge, to predict rather than react. They noticed which plants could be eaten, which berries were poisonous, which stones could cut through skin or bone. Each observation was a spark that would eventually light the fire of civilization. Predators remained a constant threat. Saber-toothed cats prowled in the shadows, and giant birds still hunted in open plains. But humans had learned to use intelligence as armor. They carried firebrands, made noise to confuse attackers, and fled in coordinated groups. Where once survival had been a test of strength alone, it was now a test of planning, of foresight, of cleverness. The social fabric of these groups grew more intricate. Bonds deepened through shared labor, shared meals, shared protection. Care for the young became a central law of life. Mothers, fathers, elders all contributed to the survival of the tribe. And in that care, a new force began to emerge. Cooperation guided by thought. Life was no longer just individual. It was communal. Across continents, parallel stories unfolded. In Africa, the birthplace of human ingenuity, early Homo erectus moved across savannas, experimenting with tools and fire. In Asia, small bands crossed forests and rivers, learning to harvest what the land offered, testing and refining their strategies. In Europe, they adapted to colder climates, developing thicker clothing from hides, mastering survival under frost and snow. Everywhere, the pulse of intelligence beat faster. With each generation, tools became more sophisticated. Stones were shaped deliberately, their edges refined to cut with precision. Bones were carved, sticks sharpened, and simple weapons gave humans an edge against creatures many times their size. In this process, innovation became instinct. Thinking and surviving were intertwined. Each decision carried the weight of life and death, and evolution rewarded those who could plan ahead. The nights around the fire became classrooms of experience. The young learned from the old, and stories passed from one mouth to another carried lessons encoded in narrative. Which plants healed wounds, which predators to avoid, where water could be found. Every lesson was survival written into memory. Over time, these lessons became traditions, forming the foundation of culture itself. Yet even as humans mastered fire, their world remained full of unpredictability. Floods reshaped rivers, storms flattened forests, and sudden shifts in climate could wipe out entire hunting grounds. But the humans adapted. They observed. They waited. They prepared. Where instinct alone had once dictated life, now reasoning guided choices. The subtle balance of patience, knowledge, and action became their greatest strength. Some began to experiment beyond immediate survival. Sparks from fire set leaves alight, and humans discovered the usefulness of controlled burns. Fires cleared hunting grounds, encouraged new plant growth, and even warded off competing predators. The connection between action and consequence became clear. Humans were learning not just to live within nature, but to influence it. Across valleys and plains, they left traces that would echo through millennia. Stone tools, sharpened bones, hearths, footprints, small markers of intelligence that marked the path from instinct to thought. These were subtle yet revolutionary steps, quiet revolutions that no roar of a beast could overshadow. And yet, progress was slow, deliberate, almost imperceptible to the impatient eye. Generations passed in cycles of trial and error. Mistakes were fatal, successes rare, but each one etched knowledge into the story of life. Humans learned not only how to survive, but why survival mattered, and how cooperation and foresight could tip the scales in a world still filled with danger. The firelight danced across faces, casting shadows that flickered like the ghosts of extinct giants. In those shadows, the ancestors of civilization began to dream, not of conquest, but of understanding. They noticed patterns in the stars, in the rivers, in the movement of the herds. They asked questions, silent at first, then spoken, and slowly answers took shape through observation, experimentation, and thought. The world was vast and perilous, yet the humans continued to expand. Tribes scattered across continents, adapting to deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains. They carried fire and knowledge with them. Their survival was no longer left to chance alone. It was guided by awareness, by strategy, and by the quiet but unstoppable force of ingenuity. And somewhere, in the deepest forests and widest plains, small hands molded the future. Sparks from flint and bone, lessons from elders, strategies perfected over countless hunts. These were the foundations of a civilization yet unborn. The earth beneath them was no longer merely a stage for survival. It was a canvas upon which the first human minds would paint the story of their species. From the flicker of the first fire to the shaping of the first tools, the age of instinct was yielding to the age of reason. The world had survived chaos, fire, and extinction. Now it would witness the rise of beings who could think, plan, and shape their destiny. And in the quiet of a night filled with stars and the soft crackle of flames, life waited, patient and eternal, for the dawn that would come not from the sun alone, but from the minds of those who had learned to master the fire within. The earth, once ruled by monsters of immense size, now resonated with a quieter power. It was the pulse of thought, of careful observation, of minds beginning to stretch beyond mere survival. The air carried the scents of growing forests, fertile rivers, and the first deliberate traces of human activity. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath, watching as the smallest creatures prepared to leave footprints that would echo through eternity. Around flickering fires, families gathered. The flames were low but persistent, their orange glow illuminating eyes that reflected both fear and wonder. For the first time, humans were not just reacting to the world, they were interpreting it. They observed the movement of the sun, the changing seasons, the behavior of animals, and even the rhythm of rivers. Each pattern, each cycle became a lesson, an invitation to plan, to anticipate, to think ahead. The tools of earlier generations had grown more sophisticated. Stones were not merely chipped, they were shaped with purpose. Bones were carved into points, sticks sharpened into spears, and bundles of leaves and vines were bound with skill. The first signs of engineering were emerging. Shelters carefully placed for warmth and protection, rudimentary fences for hunting, and pits for trapping animals. These early humans were experimenting with the world, learning that their actions could shape outcomes. Social structures began to deepen. Leaders emerged, not by brute force alone, but through wisdom and foresight. Elders shared knowledge, taught survival strategies, and passed down traditions. Rituals began to appear, simple acts at first, marking the cycles of life and death, the hunting seasons, and the passing of knowledge. Shared experience became culture, and culture became the thread that bound communities together. Even in the face of constant danger, these early humans learned cooperation. Hunting large game required strategy. Herds of mammoths, bison, and deer were carefully tracked, their movements studied over days, sometimes weeks. Groups coordinated attacks, using spears, fire, and noise to drive prey toward waiting traps. Each hunt taught lessons in communication, timing, and trust. The success of one depended on the success of all. The mastery of fire became more than a tool for warmth and protection. It became a teacher. Controlled burns were used to clear hunting grounds, encourage new plant growth, and drive away predators. The glow of fire at night brought people together, fostering storytelling and memory. Through stories, knowledge passed from generation to generation, forming the first threads of history. Across continents, similar patterns emerged. In Africa, bands of Homo erectus and later Homo sapiens adapted to changing climates, learning to migrate and settle in areas that could sustain life. In Europe, humans faced cold winters and shifting forests, crafting clothing from hides and building sturdier shelters. In Asia, they discovered rivers that teemed with fish and fertile valleys where plants could be harvested. Everywhere, observation became the foundation of survival, and survival became the foundation of thought. Communication grew more complex. Sounds, gestures, and expressions evolved into proto-language. The ability to convey plans, warn of danger, and share discoveries became a critical advantage. Humans were no longer bound solely by instinct. They could transmit knowledge, reflect on it, and build upon it. Each new sound, each new symbol, was a spark of intellect reaching across generations. The first glimpses of spirituality and philosophy appeared. Humans noticed the cycles of nature, the movement of celestial bodies, and the inevitability of life and death. They began to ask questions. Why does the river flow? Why do the stars move? Why do we live? And why must we die? Answers were not always found, but the act of questioning itself was revolutionary. It marked the moment when thought began to shape not only survival, but meaning. Early agriculture was not yet widespread, but humans began experimenting with plants. Seeds were collected and planted near shelters. The repetition of seasons taught them which plants thrived where. Slowly, humans learned to influence the growth of the earth itself, moving from wandering hunter-gatherers to planners, sowers, and caretakers. Each discovery built upon the last, a foundation for the civilization yet to come. Art began to emerge alongside utility. Marks on stone and cave walls depicted hunts, animals, and celestial events. These were not just decoration, they were communication, memory, and instruction. The act of creating art fostered reflection, imagination, and social cohesion. Humans were beginning to understand not only what the world was, but what it could mean. As knowledge accumulated, humans became more attuned to one another. Social bonds grew stronger. Cooperation deepened. Shared experience and shared planning forged communities that were resilient and adaptive. Leadership, strategy, and foresight became the new forms of power, replacing brute force. The age of instinct was yielding entirely to the age of reason. Even the environment responded. Humans cleared small patches of forest for shelters, encouraged the growth of edible plants, and hunted selectively to balance populations. They did not yet dominate the planet, but their influence was evident. The first signs of ecological management appeared. subtle but profound. Life was still harsh. Predators, storms, and climate shifts were ever present. But humans were beginning to understand the rhythms of the world. They planned for the future, stored food, and built tools that multiplied their strength. Each step, however small, was progress, a measured movement toward mastery over both environment and circumstance. In the stillness of night, by the flickering firelight, humans looked outward and upward. They watched the stars, noted the moon's phases, and observed the rivers that reflected the sky. Their minds, once constrained by survival alone, now wandered into the realm of ideas. They began to envision a world not just endured, but shaped by their hands and thoughts. Through careful observation, cooperation, and the first sparks of abstract thought, humans began to carve a path into a new era. They were no longer mere survivors of catastrophe. They were architects of possibility. Fire, tools, community, and curiosity became their allies, guiding them toward the threshold of civilization. The Earth, patient and eternal, witnessed this transformation quietly. It had survived extinction events, the reign of giants, and the endless cycles of birth and death. Now it observed life that could reflect upon itself, plan ahead, and create meaning beyond mere existence. The stage for the first true civilizations was being set. And as dawn spread its golden light across rivers, forests, and plains, the humans who had once crouched in darkness now stood at the edge of a new world. They were thinkers, planners, dreamers. The first step of a journey that would one day stretch across millennia. From the ashes of destruction to the rise of intellect, from instinct to strategy, the mammals had transformed. They had survived, adapted, and grown in complexity. And now, the age of knowledge was beginning. A time when thought itself would shape the destiny of life on Earth. The story of the rise of mammals was no longer only about survival. It was a story of curiosity, cooperation, and consciousness. The dawn of civilization had begun. And somewhere, in the quiet of ancient forests and rolling plains, the first humans looked to the sky and imagined what might lie beyond the horizon, carrying with them the legacy of every life that had survived the darkness before.